Dramily.com, unlimited drama series.
The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor of my garage, echoing like a gunshot in the silence. I'd been under the hood of Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick for 3 hours, trying to coax life back into her carburetor, when I heard my 17-year-old daughter Ellie's voice cutting through the evening air like a rusty blade. God, Mom, I can't believe you put up with him for so long. He's such a loser. I froze, my hands still gripping the engine block. The garage door was cracked open just enough for their voices to drift in from the driveway where they stood beside my wife Stephanie's pristine white Lexus, a car that cost more than most people in Milltown made in 6 months. "Keep your voice down," Stephanie hissed, but there was no real concern in her tone, just annoyance. "We don't need the whole neighborhood hearing our business." "Why? Everyone already knows Dad's a joke. Mrs. Henderson told me her husband said the guys at Murphy's Tavern call him Grease Monkey Mike behind his back. They think it's hilarious that you married so far beneath you." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of raising that ungrateful kid, and this was what I got. I wiped my hands on my coveralls and crept closer to the crack in the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "Ellie, that's enough," Stephanie said, but her voice lacked any real conviction. "Your father works hard to provide for us. Please, Mom, you make 3 times what he does at the law firm. And Brad says, 'What did you just say?'" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I'd pushed the garage door open and stepped into the fading daylight, my hands still black with motor oil, my coveralls stained with 20 years of honest work. Both women turned to stare at me like I was some kind of unwelcome intruder in my own driveway. Stephanie's perfectly made-up face went pale beneath her foundation, while Ellie just rolled her eyes and pulled out her phone. "Who's Brad?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the rage building in my chest like steam in a boiler. "He's just a friend from the gym," Stephanie said quickly, too quickly. Her manicured fingers fidgeted with her designer purse strap. "You don't know him? A friend who has opinions about our marriage?" Ellie snorted. "He's not just a friend, Dad. God, you're so clueless. Brad actually cares about Mom. He treats her like she deserves to be treated, not like some servant who should be grateful for scraps." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I looked at my wife, really looked at her. For the first time in months, the expensive highlights in her hair, the new clothes, the gym membership she'd insisted on 6 months ago, the late nights working on cases at the law firm, the sudden interest in yoga classes that seemed to run until nearly midnight. "How long?" I asked quietly. "Mike, don't be ridiculous," Stephanie said, but she couldn't meet my eyes. "Ellie's just being dramatic. You know how teenagers are." "How long, Steph?" "Oh my God, this is so embarrassing," Ellie muttered, typing furiously on her phone. "I'm telling Brad you're having one of your paranoid episodes again." That's when it clicked. The casual way she mentioned his name, like he was part of the family. The way she defended him without thinking. My own daughter was in on it. They'd been discussing me, laughing about me, planning around me like I was some kind of obstacle to be managed. I turned and walked back into my garage without another word. Behind me, I heard Stephanie's heels clicking on the concrete as she followed. "Mike, wait, let me explain." I didn't turn around. Instead, I picked up my wrench and went back to work on the Buick's engine. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of building a life together, of scraped knees and birthday parties and mortgage payments and dreams of growing old together. "There's nothing to explain," I said, my voice muffled by the hood. "You've made everything perfectly clear. It's not what you think." Now I did turn around, and whatever she saw in my face made her take a step backward. "Really? Then why don't you tell me exactly what it is, Steph? Help me understand why my wife and daughter are discussing some guy named Brad, who apparently has strong opinions about our marriage." She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in years, Stephanie Morrison, paralegal extraordinaire, master of words and legal arguments, had nothing to say. "That's what I thought," I said, turning back to the engine. "Close the door on your way out." After she left, I stood in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had been my refuge for 2 decades. The place where I'd taught myself to rebuild engines, where I'd fixed neighbors' cars for beer money, where I dreamed of maybe opening my own shop someday. Now, it felt like a prison. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I looked up my wife's social media accounts. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There he was, Brad Hutchinson, real estate broker, all white teeth and expensive suits and gym-sculpted muscles. In photo after photo, he appeared in the background of Stephanie's posts. The work happy hour she'd mentioned last month, the girls' night out from 2 weeks ago, the charity fundraiser where she'd claimed she'd gone alone. But it was the comments that really twisted the knife. Inside jokes, flirty exchanges, heart emojis that she'd never used on any of my posts. 20 years of marriage, and my wife was conducting a public affair right under my nose. I scrolled through months of evidence, my anger crystallizing into something cold and sharp. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was just some grease monkey who wouldn't notice or wouldn't care or wouldn't fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days passed before I made my move. 3 days of watching Stephanie float around the house like nothing had changed, humming while she got ready for her yoga classes, chatting on the phone in hushed tones when she thought I couldn't hear. 3 days of Ellie treating me like furniture, rolling her eyes whenever I spoke, texting constantly with what I now knew were updates to Brad about the family drama. I'd always been good with my hands, good at fixing things, good at figuring out how things worked. Turns out those same skills applied to detective work. On Thursday morning, after Stephanie left for the law office and Ellie caught the bus to school, I drove across town to Gordy's boxing gym. Gordon "Gordy" Walsh had been my best friend since high school. Back when we'd both had dreams bigger than Milltown could contain. He'd wanted to be a professional boxer. I'd wanted to race cars. Life had other plans. Now he ran a gym that smelled like sweat and broken dreams. And I fixed other people's cars instead of racing my own. "You look like hell," Gordy said when I walked through the door. He was wrapping the hands of some college kid who thought he was tough, but his eyes were on me. "What's eating you?" "Need to talk," privately. Gordy finished with the kid and led me to his office, a cramped space behind the main gym filled with old boxing posters and the kind of metal desk you could buy at a garage sale. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration and waited for me to start talking. I told him everything. The conversation I'd overheard, the social media evidence, the way my own daughter was treating me like the enemy. Gordy listened without interrupting, his scarred knuckles wrapped around his coffee cup, his face getting darker with each detail. "Son of a bitch," he said when I finished. 20 years, and she's throwing it away for some pretty boy real estate prick? It gets worse. I think they're planning to take me to the cleaners in the divorce. Stephanie's been working late a lot lately, supposedly on cases, but I think she's been meeting with lawyers, getting her ducks in a row. Gordy leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want evidence. Real evidence. Not just social media flirting. If she's going to destroy our marriage, I want to make sure I'm not the one who gets destroyed in the process." "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" I nodded. I need to catch them in the act, but I need help. Gordy's grin was not a pleasant thing to see. "Brother, you came to the right place. I know a guy who knows a guy. We can get you set up with some surveillance equipment that'll make the FBI jealous." 2 hours later, I was the proud owner of several tiny cameras, a GPS tracker, and a recording device that looked like a regular pen. The guy Gordy knew, a former private investigator who'd lost his license for reasons he didn't want to discuss, had given me a crash course in surveillance techniques. "The key," he'd said, "is patience. Don't get greedy, don't get sloppy, and whatever you do, don't let your emotions drive the bus. You want to nail them, you do it right." I spent the rest of Thursday installing the GPS tracker on Stephanie's car and placing one of the cameras in our bedroom. hidden behind a picture frame on the dresser. If she was bringing Brad home while I was at work, I'd know about it. Friday night, Stephanie announced she was going to her yoga class, same as she had every Friday for the past 6 months. She kissed my cheek, actually kissed my cheek, like we were still a happy couple, and told me not to wait up. These sessions run late, she said, adjusting her yoga pants that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Namrata is really pushing us hard this month. Namrata? I asked, looking up from the television. The instructor. I've mentioned her before. She hadn't, but I just nodded and went back to pretending to watch the game. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I was on my laptop, tracking her GPS signal. She drove straight downtown, but instead of turning toward the yoga studio, she headed for the Riverside Inn, a mid-level hotel that catered to business travelers and people who needed a place to conduct business they didn't want conducted at home. I grabbed my keys and followed, keeping my distance, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tracker showed her parked in the hotel lot. I pulled into a gas station across the street and waited. 20 minutes later, a silver BMW pulled into the lot. Even from a distance, I could see Brad's perfectly styled hair as he got out of the car and walked toward the hotel entrance. He moved like a man who owned the world, confident and casual, like this was just another Friday night. I sat in my truck for another hour, watching the windows of the hotel, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. When I finally drove home, I felt like I'd aged 10 years in one evening. But I had what I needed. Now it was time to plan my next move. Saturday morning, I woke up early and drove to the hardware store. I bought a dozen roses, a bottle of champagne, and a card that read, "For the happy couple." Then I drove to the Riverside Inn and had a conversation with the desk clerk, a kid who looked like he was barely old enough to vote. I need to surprise my wife, I told him, sliding a $100 bill across the counter. She's been having a hard time lately, and I want to do something special. Room 237. Can you make sure these get delivered around 8 o'clock tonight? The kid looked at the money, then at me, then at the roses and champagne. That's really sweet, man. Your wife's lucky to have someone who cares that much. If only he knew. Friday rolled around again, and like clockwork, Stephanie announced her yoga plans. This time, I was ready. I followed the same routine, parked at the same gas station, watched the same silver BMW pull into the hotel lot. But this time, I had a front row seat to the show. At exactly 8 o'clock, I watched from my truck as the hotel clerk knocked on the door of room 237. Through the window, I could see movement inside, frantic scrambling as two figures tried to figure out who was at the door. When Brad finally opened it, wearing nothing but a hotel towel, his face went through a series of expressions that would have been funny if they weren't so satisfying. The clerk handed over the roses and champagne with a big smile, probably repeating the message I'd written in the card. "Smile, you're on camera. Love, Mike." I'd attached one of my surveillance cameras to the bottom of the champagne bucket with industrial adhesive. By the time they found it, it would have already uploaded hours of footage to the cloud storage account I'd set up specifically for this purpose. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I drove home and waited. At 11:30 p.m., Stephanie's car pulled into the driveway. She came into the house looking flustered, her hair messed up despite her attempts to fix it, her yoga clothes wrinkled in ways that yoga definitely didn't cause. "How was class?" I asked from my chair in the living room. "Fine," she said quickly. "Great. Really great. Namrata worked us hard tonight." I bet she did. Something in my tone made her look at me sharply, but I just smiled and went back to watching television. She stood there for a moment, like she wanted to say something, then shook her head and went upstairs. I waited until I heard the shower running, then pulled out my laptop and checked the cloud storage account. The camera had worked perfectly. 3 hours of high-definition footage of my wife and her boyfriend doing things that definitely weren't yoga. I uploaded the best clips to a private video sharing account and copied the link. Then, I opened our family group chat, the one that included Stephanie, Ellie, my parents, and Stephanie's sister, and typed a simple message. "Hey everyone, thought you might be interested in Stephanie's new yoga routine. She's gotten really flexible lately." I pasted the link and hit send. Then I sat back and waited for my phone to explode. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. It was my mother, and she was crying. Michael, what have you done? I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through the window above the sink. I'd been awake all night, waiting for this moment. And now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. I showed everyone the truth, Mom, that's all. That video. Michael, how could you do something so cruel? Cruel. That was rich, coming from the woman who'd spent the last 5 years telling me how lucky I was to have married up when I got together with Stephanie. The woman who'd made it clear that she thought my wife was too good for me, and that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection I could get. Where's the cruelty in showing people who my wife really is? You've humiliated her. You've humiliated your whole family. No, Mom. Stephanie humiliated our family. I just made sure everyone could see it. The second call came from Stephanie's sister, Janet. She was not crying. She was screaming. You sick bastard. How dare you violate my sister's privacy like that? Privacy? I laughed.
90 days of calls to the same number. You bought a burner for her.
Give it to me.
One reason not to drop it.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
And the sound was bitter even to my own ears. She was screwing another man in a hotel room, Janet. Privacy went out the window when she decided to destroy our marriage. You had no right to record them without their consent. Actually, I did. It's a one-party consent state. And since it was my wife, I had every legal right to document her adultery. I checked with a lawyer. That was a lie, but it sounded good, and it shut Janet up long enough for me to hang up on her. The third call never came, because Stephanie's phone was apparently dead or turned off. But I could hear her in the shower upstairs, and the sound of her sobbing echoed through the bathroom walls. Ellie, on the other hand, was very much awake and very much angry. She came storming down the stairs at 7:15, her phone in her hand, her face red with rage and embarrassment. Dad, what the hell is wrong with you? Watch your language. Don't you dare lecture me about language after what you just did. Everyone at school is going to see this. My friends, my teachers, everyone. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to help your mother plan her affair. That stopped her cold. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she had nightmares, instead of the hostile teenager who'd been treating me like garbage for months. You weren't what, Ellie? You weren't telling Brad about our family business? You weren't passing along information about my work schedule so they'd know when it was safe to meet? You weren't making fun of me with your mother's boyfriend? Her face crumpled, and for a second I almost felt bad. Almost. I didn't know it would go this far, she whispered. Well, now you do. Actions have consequences, kiddo. That's a lesson your mother apparently never learned, but maybe you still can. At 8 o'clock, Stephanie finally came downstairs. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and she was wearing an old robe that I hadn't seen in years. We need to talk, she said. I think we're past talking. Michael, please. I know you're angry, but this isn't the way to handle things. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can what, Steph? Pretend the last 6 months didn't happen? Pretend I didn't just watch a video of you and Brad doing things we haven't done in our bedroom in 2 years? She flinched like I'd slapped her. It didn't mean anything. It was just, I was lonely and he was there and you decided to throw away 20 years of marriage for some real estate broker with good hair and a fancy car. That's not fair. Fair. I stood up so fast, my chair scraped against the kitchen floor. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been coming to me when you were feeling lonely instead of running to another man. Fair would have been asking for a divorce before you started screwing around. Fair would have been not involving our daughter in your betrayal. I never meant for Ellie to get involved. But she did get involved, didn't she? She knew about Brad. She was helping you, covering for you, lying to me right alongside you. My own daughter thinks I'm a joke because you taught her to think that. Stephanie sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. What do you want me to say, Michael? That I'm sorry? I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You're not sorry you did it, Steph. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. My phone buzzed with a text message. Then another, then another. Word was spreading through Milltown like wildfire, and everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. Had Mike Morrison really caught his wife cheating? Had he really posted the video for everyone to see? You need to take that video down, Stephanie said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. Please, Michael. I'll do anything you want. I'll end things with Brad. I'll quit my job. Just please take it down. Too late for that. It's been shared and downloaded more times than I can count. The internet is forever, Steph. You should know that. This will ruin me. My career, my reputation, everything. Should have thought about that before you decided to star in your own amateur porn film. She started crying again, big ugly sobs that shook her whole body. A year ago, the sound would have broken my heart. Now it just made me feel empty. I'm filing for divorce, I said quietly. I've already talked to a lawyer. With the evidence I have, you won't get much in the settlement. The house is in my name, the business is in my name, and adultery still means something in this state. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, Stephanie. You did this to yourself. My phone rang again. This time it was Gordy. Brother, you need to get down here, now. Why? What's wrong? Brad's here at the gym, and he's not happy. I looked at Stephanie, who was still crying into her hands, then at Ellie, who was standing in the doorway looking lost and scared. I'll be back later, I said. We'll finish this conversation then. But as I drove toward Gordy's gym, I knew we wouldn't be finishing anything. Some conversations don't have endings, just stopping points. And I was done talking. It was time to let my actions do the talking for me. Brad Hutchinson was pacing back and forth in front of Gordy's gym like a caged animal when I pulled into the parking lot. Even from inside my truck, I could see the rage radiating off him in waves. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that suggested he'd spent the morning fielding phone calls from clients, colleagues, and probably his own wife. Because, of course, Brad was married. I'd discovered that little detail during my research, though he'd apparently forgotten to mention it to Stephanie. His wife, Karen, was a pediatric nurse who worked at the children's hospital in the next county. They had 2 kids and a mortgage on a house in the suburbs. Brad's affair with my wife wasn't just destroying my marriage, it was about to destroy his too. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching him pace, and felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. For months, this man had been living his best life, sleeping with my wife, laughing about me with my daughter, thinking he was so much smarter and better than the dumb mechanic who didn't even know what was happening under his own roof. Now he was about to learn what happened when you underestimated Mike Morrison. I got out of my truck and walked toward the gym entrance. Brad spotted me immediately and came charging across the parking lot like a bull seeing red. "You sick son of a bitch," he shouted, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I stopped walking and let him come to me. Up close, Brad was even more perfect than his photos suggested. Straight white teeth, clear skin, the kind of tan that came from expensive vacations instead of working outside. He probably spent more on hair products in a month than I spent on groceries. "Good morning, Brad," I said calmly. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Don't you dare act like nothing happened. You posted a private video of me and Stephanie online. That's revenge porn, you psycho. I could have you arrested. Actually, it's not revenge porn. I checked. Revenge porn involves sharing intimate images without consent after a relationship ends. But you and I never had a relationship, Brad. You and my wife did. And since she's my wife, I had every legal right to document her activities. That's bullshit, and you know it. Is it? Tell you what, call the police. Have me arrested. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing all about your 6-month affair with a married woman. I bet your wife, Karen, will be interested too. And your kids. What are their names again? Emma and Tyler?" The color drained from Brad's face. "How do you know about your family? The family you forgot to mention to my wife." "Oh, Brad, I know lots of things. I know you've been using your real estate connections to look for apartments for you and Stephanie. I know you've been planning to leave your wife as soon as Stephanie's divorce is finalized. I know you've been telling my daughter that I'm a loser who doesn't deserve a woman like her mother." Brad's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. Behind him, I could see Gordy standing in the doorway of the gym, his arms crossed over his chest, a grin on his scarred face. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice still calm, still reasonable. You're going to get in your fancy BMW and drive away. You're going to stop seeing my wife, stop calling her, stop texting her. You're going to pretend she doesn't exist. And if I don't, then I'll make sure Karen gets a copy of that video, along with screenshots of all your text messages to Stephanie, photos of you two together, and a detailed timeline of your affair. I'll also make sure your boss at the real estate agency gets the same package. How do you think that'll work out for you? Brad's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. I almost hoped he would. It had been a long time since I'd been in a fight, but I'd grown up in Milltown, where settling disputes with your fists was still considered a legitimate form of communication. You can't blackmail me, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm not blackmailing you, Brad. I'm just explaining the natural consequences of your choices. You decided to sleep with my wife. I decided to document it. You decided to involve my daughter in your affair. I decided to involve your family in the consequences. Seems fair to me. Stephanie loves me. She's going to leave you anyway. Maybe she will, but she's not going to leave me for you, not anymore. Brad stared at me for a long moment, his perfect face twisted with rage and frustration. Then, without another word, he turned and stalked back to his BMW. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out of the parking lot, leaving rubber on the asphalt. Gordy walked over to where I was standing, shaking his head in admiration. Damn, brother. That was cold. Effective, but cold. He had it coming. What now? Now I go home and finish what I started. But when I got home, the house was empty. Stephanie's car was gone, and so were most of her clothes. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, written on her law firm's letterhead in her precise handwriting. Mike, I'm staying at Janet's for a few days while we figure out how to handle this situation. I've contacted my lawyer, and she says what you did was illegal, regardless of what you think. We need to discuss this like adults, not like children having a tantrum. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. S. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. Then I opened a beer and sat down at my kitchen table to wait for the next shoe to drop. It didn't take long. At 3 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into my driveway and a woman in an expensive suit got out. She was tall, blonde, and walked with the kind of confidence that came from winning more arguments than she'd lost. She knocked on my front door like she owned the place. Mr. Morrison? I'm Tina Kellerman, Mrs. Morrison's attorney. We need to talk. I recognized the name from Stephanie's stories about work. Tina Kellerman was the star paralegal at Hoffman & Associates, the kind of woman who could have been a lawyer herself if she'd wanted to deal with law school. She was also, according to Stephanie, ruthlessly ambitious and completely without scruples when it came to winning. Unless you have a warrant, I don't think we do, I said through the screen door. Mr. Morrison, what you did last night was a serious crime. Distributing intimate images without consent is a felony in this state. You could go to prison. Like I told your boyfriend Brad, it's not revenge porn when it's my own wife. Tina's smile was sharp as a knife. Actually, it is. The law was updated last year to include spousal situations. But I'm not here to threaten you with criminal charges. I'm here to offer you a deal. Despite myself, I was curious. What kind of deal? You take down the video, issue a public apology, and agree to an uncontested divorce with a generous settlement for Mrs. Morrison. In exchange, she won't press charges. I laughed out loud. Generous settlement? For the woman who cheated on me for 6 months? I don't think so. Mr. Morrison, you need to understand your situation. Right now, you're looking at felony charges, a ruined reputation, and a divorce that will leave you with nothing. Mrs. Morrison is being very generous by offering you a way out. Or, I said, opening the screen door and stepping onto the porch, Stephanie is panicking because she knows she's screwed, and she sent you here to try to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. Tina's confident smile flickered for just a moment, and in that flicker, I saw something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just professional courtesy. This was personal. Do I know you? I asked. I don't think so. But she was lying. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she held herself. in the slight tremor in her voice when she said it. Tina Kellerman and I had met before, somewhere, somehow. And whatever had happened between us, she hadn't forgotten it. "You've got 24 hours to consider our offer," she said, turning to leave. "After that, Mrs. Morrison will have no choice but to involve the police." I watched her drive away, my mind racing. There was something about her that nagged at me, some memory just out of reach. It would come to me eventually. It always did. But right now I had bigger problems to worry about. Because if Tina Kellerman was right about the law, I might have just handed my wife the weapon she needed to destroy me completely. It was time to call in some favors of my own. The memory hit me at 2 in the morning while I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out why Tina Kellerman's face looked so familiar. It came flooding back like a dam bursting, and suddenly I was 25 years old again, standing in the ruins of my first business partnership. Kellerman. Christina Kellerman. She'd gone by Chris back then, when she was my business partner in Morrison and Kellerman Auto Repair. We'd been friends in high school, dated briefly after graduation, then decided to pool our money and open a garage together. For 2 years, it had been perfect. We worked well together, complemented each other's skills, and the business was actually turning a profit. Then, I'd caught her skimming money from the register. It hadn't been much at first, 20 here, 50 there, but over the course of 6 months, she'd stolen nearly $3,000. When I confronted her about it, she'd denied everything, claimed I was paranoid, accused me of trying to force her out because I couldn't handle having a female partner. The fight had been spectacular. She'd threatened to sue me, to ruin my reputation, to make sure I never worked on another car in Milltown, in